They told you it never happened. They said it was exaggerated. A misunderstanding. A conspiracy theory created by people who didn't understand science. But buried beneath classified documents, destroyed files, and sworn silence is a truth that refuses to disappear. For more than 20 years, the United States government secretly experimented on the human mind. Not on enemies, not on criminals alone, on its own citizens, students, patients, soldiers, ordinary people who never agreed to become part of history's darkest psychological experiment. This was Project MKUltra, a program built on fear, powered by secrecy, and driven by a belief so dangerous that it nearly erased the line between science and torture. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the world that created it. The year was 1945. World War II was over, but peace was an illusion. The bombs had stopped falling, yet a new war was already beginning. A war without trenches, without uniforms, without clear rules. It was a war for the human mind. America emerged victorious from World War II, but it also emerged terrified. Terrified not of weapons, but of ideas. The Nazis had shown how propaganda could reshape an entire nation. Millions followed orders not because they were forced, but because they believed. At the same time, the Soviet Union was expanding its influence across Eastern Europe. Communism was spreading, not through invasion, but through persuasion. To American intelligence agencies, this was the real threat. If belief could be controlled, then freedom itself was fragile. Then came the stories. American prisoners of war returning from Korea. Men who came home different. Men who confessed to crimes they never committed. Men who publicly criticized their own country. Men who seemed rewritten. The word used to describe it was chilling. Brainwashing. CIA officials became obsessed with one terrifying possibility. What if the enemy had learned how to break the human mind? What if they could erase loyalty, implant obedience, and rebuild a person from the inside out? And worse, what if America was already too late? Fear does dangerous things to powerful people. Inside the CIA, discussions began to change. Ethics were reframed as obstacles. Human rights became inconveniences. Oversight was seen as weakness. The goal was no longer to ask whether mind control was possible. The goal was to achieve it first. In 1953, under the leadership of CIA Director Allen Dulles, a secret program was approved. Its name meant nothing by design. A meaningless label to hide a monstrous idea. MKUltra. No announcement. No vote in Congress. No public record. Only a classified objective written in cold, clinical language. Develop techniques to control human behavior. That single sentence would justify years of abuse. From the very beginning, MKUltra ignored consent. Volunteers were unreliable. They asked questions. They could refuse. So the CIA found subjects who couldn't. Mental hospitals filled with patients who trusted doctors. Prisons filled with men who had no power to say no. Universities filled with students who believed they were helping science. Military bases filled with soldiers trained to obey orders without question. Many subjects were never told they were part of an experiment. Some were told they were receiving treatment. Others were told nothing at all. Drinks were spiked. Injections were disguised. Pills were administered under false pretenses. And at the center of it all was a substance that fascinated the CIA more than any weapon ever built. LSD. A drug capable of dissolving reality, of shattering identity, of making the mind question itself. To MKUltra scientists, LSD was not a danger. It was a tool. They believed it could unlock secrets hidden in the brain, that it could erase memories, that it could make people confess, that it could turn anyone into a controllable asset. Subjects were given massive doses, sometimes daily, sometimes for weeks. They were isolated, interrogated, observed as their minds unraveled. Some laughed uncontrollably. Some screamed. Some never came back the same. But the experiments didn't stop. Because from the CIA's perspective, failure wasn't cruelty. Failure was not pushing far enough. Safe houses were established in major cities. Apartments disguised as normal living spaces. Prostitutes were hired to lure men inside. Drinks were poured. Drugs were administered. Behind one-way mirrors, CIA agents watched. They watched as men lost control of their thoughts, as paranoia took hold, as reality fractured, all without consent, all without accountability. And for years, the public knew nothing. Records were hidden. Budgets were laundered through shell organizations. Scientists were paid through front groups to keep the CIA's involvement invisible. MKUltra wasn't a rogue operation. It was institutional, approved, funded, protected. And the deeper it went, the harder it became to stop. Because by then, too many people knew. And too many lives had already been destroyed. As the experiments expanded, the line between research and cruelty disappeared completely. What began as a search for defensive techniques slowly transformed into something far more aggressive. The CIA was no longer just trying to understand mind control. It wanted to master it. Scientists involved in the project explored every possible method that could weaken, fracture, or overwrite a human personality. Drugs were only the beginning. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, total sensory isolation. Electroshock therapy pushed far beyond accepted medical limits. The theory was simple and terrifying. If you could break a person down far enough, you could rebuild them however you wanted. Subjects were kept awake for days, sometimes weeks. Lights were kept on constantly. Sounds were repeated endlessly until they lost meaning. In other cases, all sound and light were removed, leaving the mind alone with itself. People began to hallucinate without drugs. Time lost structure. Identity became unstable. And when the drugs were added on top of this, the results were unpredictable. Some subjects became deeply suggestible. Others became terrified. Some shut down completely. To MKUltra researchers, these reactions were not warnings. They were data. Universities played a critical role in keeping the project alive. Prestigious institutions unknowingly hosted CIA-funded experiments. Professors accepted grants without knowing their true source. Graduate students conducted trials believing they were advancing psychology. In many cases, even the researchers did not know who they were really working for. This layer of separation protected the CIA. If something went wrong, responsibility dissolved. One of the most disturbing aspects of MKUltra was how ordinary the settings were. These experiments did not always happen in secret underground facilities. They happened in classrooms, in hospital wards, in apartments that looked like anyone else's home. Victims often had no reason to be suspicious. They trusted authority. They trusted medicine. They trusted the system. That trust was weaponized against them. Among the most tragic cases was that of individuals who entered psychiatric care seeking help. Instead of treatment, they became test subjects. Instead of recovery, they experienced prolonged psychological damage. Some left with memory gaps that never healed. Some developed anxiety that followed them for life. Some were never the same again. Families were rarely given explanations. Doctors cited complications. Institutions denied responsibility. And above it all, the program continued quietly. Inside the CIA, concerns were occasionally raised. A few voices questioned the ethics. A few worried about exposure. But those voices were drowned out by urgency. The Cold War justified everything. If the enemy could control minds, then America had to do it better. Or so they believed. By the 1960s, MKUltra had grown massive. Dozens of subprojects. Hundreds of experiments. Millions of dollars funneled through fake foundations and research grants. Even within the government, very few people knew the full scope. Secrecy was layered on top of secrecy. Documents were compartmentalized. Names were coded. Files were scattered. The system was designed so that no single failure could expose the whole truth. But no secret lasts forever. The beginning of the end did not come from a dramatic confession or a sudden leak. It came from questions. Journalists began investigating strange patterns. Why had certain experiments received unusual funding? Why were people reporting similar experiences across different cities? Why did official explanations never quite add up? At the same time, public trust in government was eroding. The Vietnam War had shaken confidence. Protests filled the streets. Citizens no longer accepted silence as reassurance. Pressure slowly built. And then, in the 1970s, the unthinkable happened. The government began investigating itself. Senate committees were formed. Testimony was demanded. Files were requested. For the first time, MKUltra faced the possibility of daylight. What investigators found was alarming and incomplete, because as the walls closed in, someone inside the CIA made a decision. If the truth could not be defended, it would be erased. Documents were destroyed. Boxes of records were burned. Entire histories vanished in smoke. By the time Congress understood what MKUltra truly was, most of the evidence was already gone. What remained were fragments. Enough to prove the program existed. Enough to prove abuse occurred. But not enough to fully understand the damage. Victims stepped forward. Some told their stories publicly. Others were too traumatized to speak. Compensation was rare. Justice was limited. No one went to prison. And the official explanation was simple. Mistakes were made. Lessons were learned. The program was over. But the question that refused to die was this. Was it really over? Because MKUltra was not born from madness. It was born from fear, from ambition, from a belief that control equals safety. And those beliefs did not disappear when the files were destroyed. They evolved. Today, the methods are different. The language is softer. The technology is more advanced. But the idea remains. If you can influence thought, if you can shape perception, if you can guide behavior, then power no longer needs force. It only needs access. And that is why Project MKUltra still matters. Not because it was a secret, but because it proved something deeply unsettling. The human mind can be treated as a weapon or a target. And history has shown that when fear takes control, even democratic governments are willing to cross lines they once claimed would never be crossed. The experiment may have ended, but the lesson it revealed is still unfolding.